Well, in a few minutes, we'll go back to the soggy Free State for an update on how Johan van Zyl is battling the floodwater. But first, the big picture. It's been one of the worst floods since 1988. And I have with me Agri SA's economist, Dawie, Maree, and our regular commodities expert, Erhard Briedenhann. To start off with you, Dawie, then, worst since 1988. What is going to be the cost of this flood, do you think?
Chris, it's very difficult to say at this stage. It's very, very early. We've done a preliminary estimate with the Department of Agriculture and the National Disaster Management Centre. Currently, we are looking at about 4 billion rand in terms of infrastructure and agricultural crop losses.
And Erhard, just to bring you in, you speak to a lot of farmers in your line as a commodities expert. What sort of stories are you getting from on the ground about what's been happening in these past weeks?
There's certainly some challenges we're going to face as far as logistics is concerned, with bridges having washed away and trucks getting stuck in mud. But certainly the effect on the commodity side has really been quite area specific, and perhaps the old cliche, rain makes grain, is probably good for those that aren't flooded.
Now, you heard on the piece that Ernst Janowski from ABSA saying he thinks some farmers might go to the wall. How likely is that?
Chris, like you said, you know, it's a thing of farming. Everybody goes at some stage to the wall, and I think we might see especially in the Northern Cape, where we had a big problem with the table grape crop, that some of those farmers can get off the bus. But we've spoken to all the commercial banks and the land bank, and they will look at individual farmers' cases where they might help the farmer with financing and so on.
I mean, Erhard, you've got a lot of experience in the agriculture industry. What can you do when you've had a big disaster like this? What do the farmers say to you? I mean, apart from wait for the sun to come out, what is there that you can do? Yes,
I think we're hoping for conditions to improve. The other thing that's been mentioned a few times is the concern over quality. And hopefully, if conditions improve, the quality of the grain won't be affected, because that's a big concern for the future.
So, Dawie, just moving on here, I mean, they said that going to the, unfortunately, liquidation is part of agriculture. You say the banks are trying to look at extending credit to help people out, but surely this couldn't have come at a worse time when recession has been picking away at farmers for many, many years.
Yeah, definitely, and especially with, and again, to look at it, the table grape industry, which was the hardest with all the commodities or all the crops at this stage. You know, with a strong rand the past few months, where export earnings was down, and now the flood that hit them. So that's a very difficult situation for those farmers in the Northern Cape.
I mean, a bit of word on the ground still with you, Dawie. I mean, what sort of stories are you hearing about devastation from the farmers you represent?
Yeah, from the farmers, and if I may again refer to the Northern Cape, the grape farmers. Those vineyards, or most of those vineyards, is still underwater, and it's now that the peak of the flood is now past 2 weeks' time. So those farmers are still waiting for the water to subside, and that may take another 2 to 3 weeks before they can make early assessments of their damage. As was previously said, bridges that was took away, and a lot of vineyards that couldn't be reached, especially on the islands within the Orange River system, where the majority or major part of the crop is planted. So farmers are really struggling in the province to get to the crops and to see what's the damage.
So, Erhard, let's take this a bit wider now. I mean, what is happening with our weather at the moment? There are a lot of theories, I know, but this has been one of the wettest summers anyone can remember.
I think it's definitely not only South Africa. As we've mentioned, it's a global phenomenon. We've seen droughts in Argentina, Russia, Ukraine, and then floods in Australia as well. So certainly a weather pattern which is on its head at the moment.
I mean, what would you advise farmers out there who might be suffering in all of this? I mean, presumably you were around working in the 88 flood. I mean, what lessons do you think we'll learn then? Definitely
that government has a flood relief system in place. So farmers must take part in that. Assessments will be done by the Provincial Department of Agriculture and the Provincial Disaster Management Centres. And farmers must participate in that to make an assessment of the flood damage to do the verification in terms of the assessments to get a proper flood relief from government. Now that's one thing that Agri SA is part of with the National Department of Agriculture. We are part of the panel of experts as well to do those assessments and to get the proper relief down to the farmers on the ground.
And you've mentioned a figure of 4 billion rands worth of damage so far. How high do you think that figure could go?
Chris, as I've said, that's an early estimate. I think the first real assessment could only be done by the end of March when all the water subsides. That figure might go higher, especially in terms of infrastructure, vineyards that's been damaged, drainage systems that's been taken away, and then crop assessments as well. So that figure might increase. In certain areas, certain provinces, it might still stay the same. But I think the Northern Cape province is the one to watch in terms of their damage.
How much long-term damage is this going to be? I mean, how many years could it take to recover from this?
It might take, again, in the table grape industry or the grape industry, it might take a few years. New vineyards must be established, and that takes, 3 to 4 or 5 years before it comes into production again. In terms of the other crops, cash crops, maize and sunflower and cotton that was affected, that might come back into production next year. But we must take into account the irrigation infrastructure must be re-established first.